Hey everyone, it's Nefus here. In this video, I'm going to go over this rather interesting review I found from Checkpoint Gaming written by Ami Kulas in regards to their kind of rating on the Elder Scrolls Online Necrom launch. And I'm not going to be like lambasting this review or the game or whatever. It's not like a rage bait video. I'm just going to be using this review as a transitional kind of thought point into what I'm thinking and feeling as a content creator and player for ESO, because I think there's a couple things I definitely want to talk about, and perhaps these are things that you are also experiencing or feeling with ESO. So this review starts off great, summarizes Necrom, what's coming with Necrom, what's the content, and it kind of hits on this big thing that I think a lot of people at ZeniMax Studios were worried about, and that's why they kept kind of bringing it up at various points since I think May or April, that, hey, it might look similar to Morrowind, but it's not Morrowind. And I kind of understand why they said that, because every time I port into the new trial and I'm streaming, a lot of viewers are like, are you going for TikTok Tormentor? Why are you in VHOF? And I'm like, no way. It doesn't look remotely like VHOF lobby in terms of layout or anything, or in terms of size. But apparently a lot of people will just look at mushrooms, the big picture models, and they're like, oh, that's Vardenfell. So I kind of understand now why Zos was a bit worried and kept emphasizing that it's not exactly the same, but yeah, whatever. To me, though, if we're talking about a review of the game, a review of the chapter launch, I would say in terms of environment and scenery, Apocrypha is really well done. So I would say lore-wise, yeah, you would absolutely go to Teval'ni Peninsula and Apocrypha too. But environment-wise, I think Apocrypha is just infinitely more interesting, infinitely more new, but also kind of not new at the same time, much more in those same aspects than Morrowind is, right? Or Vardenfell expansion was. So I do, and I think a lot of people have also been enjoying Apocrypha, and I think a lot of people have been kind of like enjoying the lore as well from both zones, but not necessarily the Teval'ni Peninsula. The Arcanist class, so this is kind of weird, because to me, I feel like the Arcanist class is definitely a better DLC class than when Necromancer and Warden were, when they first came out in 2019 and 2017 respectively. I think the class feels a lot better. I think the class functionally is a lot better, a lot less buggy. That's at least within the terms of, at least within the context of combat. I'm actually really enjoying the Arcanist to the point I am just DPSing everywhere as an Arcanist. And I think once more people figure out the PvP stuff for it and some of the other aspects of the class, I think people will enjoy a lot more. And of course, honestly, we all knew this was coming, and I want to talk about it. A new class in ESO always takes at least 1 to 2 patches after it comes out to be fleshed out, just simply because there's now a much bigger pool of players to just test it and stress test it and play it, essentially, compared to a much smaller pool of developers or QA testers playing the Arcanist. But all in all, I would give the environment thus far, I'd say for Apocrypha, 9 out of 10. Teval'ni Peninsula, like a 7 or 6 out of 10. I would give the Arcanist like a solid 8 or 9 out of 10, depending on what you're doing or whatever. Trial, I'm going to give Sanity's Edge actually probably like a 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10 at best. And I'll explain why, because this review kind of, this is the interesting part of the review, because when we think video game journalist, we don't really think of someone who's too familiar with what they're talking about in terms of like end game play or in terms of in-depth play, just kind of like surface level stuff, at least for a lot of the articles we see from these like bait websites like Game Rant or whatever, or Dexerto. And Sanity's Edge here, according to the reviewer, is on par with Kind's Aegis in terms of difficulty. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, this is really interesting, because I've asked this to Raiders too, and basically unanimously, everyone agrees with me on the fact that Sanity's Edge is easier than Dreadsail Reef or Rock Groove, which is a good thing, and I'll talk about this in a bit. And when I asked them, hey, how about, what do you think? Like, is it easier than Kynes or Sunspire or what? And some players have told me, yeah, it's easier. And some players told me, actually, it's harder. And then we kind of start talking about comparing Kynes Aegis at launch to Saying's Edge at launch. Because when you compare Kynes Aegis now, yeah, I think Kynes is definitely easier than Saying's, but is it easier than it was at launch? So that's kind of interesting that the reviewer thinks, oh, it's on par with Kynes Aegis. I don't know if they mean like now or like when they came out. So yeah, while the first boss, Exarchonic Ysaela, is challenging, the subsequent two bosses are more forgiving, which I think they've only done normal or veteran. Perhaps they didn't dip into hard mode, because hard mode wise, Ansel is definitely, at least the last 20% of the boss is definitely the hardest. It's still a bit buggy in there too, which kind of exacerbates certain mechanics and movements of the group. And here, also an interesting point. In contrast, the ad pulls in Saying's Edge can be harder than the bosses. And I disagree with this completely. It's just, I would say it's even easier than Kynes when it first came out. You just stack everything and just burn it. That's really it. You can have messy outcomes if your group is not well coordinated, or if your group is not on the same page or anything. But it's like for any trial, really. And that's really it. I don't know if the ad pulls are harder than the bosses. To me, they're easier and actually well paced. I think the content team did a wonderful job with this trial, and I think the fact that it is easier than VDSR and Rock Groove is a good thing. And I've been giving this feedback to them for at least a few years now. Like, I just keep telling them, you guys need to just stop worrying about the world record score pushers. You guys need to worry about the day one trifecta teams or whatever. You guys just kind of shouldn't be balancing content around the top 1% or top 0.01% of the 1%. It's just not healthy, because, like, let's be honest here. To me, the biggest gatekeepers in ESO are not necessarily the players or the systems the players make around themselves, in my opinion. I think the biggest gatekeeper is actually the actual content itself, to a degree, at least whereas as far as trials are concerned. I'm not talking about dungeons, I'm talking about trials. Because when you look at Dreadsail Reef and Rock Grove and the rosters and the people who've cleared the hard moons or gotten the trifectas from those two trials, and compared to every other trial and other groups, it's like, well, there's a reason why the same tanks or same supports are on different rosters. There's a reason why not many people have Dreadsail Reef hard modes cleared, or even vet clear. There's a reason why Rock Grove hard mode and the Trifecta or Planesbreaker is not as like achieved as much as even Godslayer, right, or even Dawnbringer. It's just completely on a different level, to the point where when you're getting people to learn the trial, it takes a while, and that's not very satisfying to a lot of the group, especially if they're most ESO players just are not patient when it comes to this kind of stuff, unfortunately. So the fact that, like, they made it easier, or at least more approachable — I'm not going to use the word accessible or accessibility, because I still don't know after update 35 whatever the hell accessibility means within the context of Elder Scrolls Online, whether it's used by the developers or the players. I think that's also a key thing to note for combat. I think combat, or certain aspects of combat, should also be approachable. Not necessarily made easier, but approachable. The same way Saying's Edge was made a bit more approachable for more players. I think more players being included in the content is more healthy in the long run, for not just the game, but for the community, and also the, I guess, just everything in general, like just every aspect. There's no downside to it. Even if some teams the top teams get like day one trifecta, who cares? Right? But that kind of leads into what I want to talk about as far as how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking about with Necrom and ESO in general right now. So the reviewer gives 7.5 for Necrom. I would actually rate it higher. And of course, in before, people are like, oh, Nephis the shield, Zosh shield. Whoa. No, I would actually rate it probably around this minimum. I'd probably give it an 8 or 9. I mean, I think a lot of people I've talked to are really happy with the class. I think a lot of people I've talked to are really happy with the lore, which is very surprising because story-wise, Blackwood, Greymoor, and High Isle were just not good. Like, just not very exciting, or just not as deep as Necrom is trying to do or is doing. They've hit the right notes for the most part. I will say that there are a couple of things they could have done better, like the handling of the new mythics. It just kind of killed a lot of people's excitement when they nerfed, in my opinion, the mythics, or just kind of like devalued them. So you don't really have people, excited to chase a power creep. You don't really have people, apart from the class and stuff, kind of just stick with the game for too long, because what's happening now as a result, unfortunately, when we're talking about like a really small subset community, like the endgame PvE community, however you want to define that, is once they get the trifecta of this trial, they'll just probably kind of take a break until next year, until the next trial, which is normally what happens anyway. But when we're talking about ESO now within the context of 2023 and 2024, it's just really bad timing. Like in itself, in a vacuum, I think Necrom is great. I think it's easily 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. But when we're talking about like the grand picture, with Starfield coming out, with Diablo 4 releasing on the same week as Necrom, with Zelda, with Final Fantasy 16, and all these other IPs and games coming back and out for this year and next year, I don't know how ESO is going to handle it. It feels to me right now, the new and returning players are, of course, getting the most out of it compared to like the people who've been sticking around for, I think, too long. Like me, I've been playing this game for too long, I feel like. And I don't know if I'm burning out. I don't know if I'm just bored, but maybe I am. Because I mean, I feel like we've done everything. We've kind of dissected the game. There's like nothing really to expand to within the game, in my opinion, if you're a veteran player. It feels like at this point, even with a new class, it feels a little unfulfilling. I'm not saying it's the developer's fault. I'm not saying it's the game itself. I'm just saying I think the greater context is with all these other games coming out, there's like a subconscious understanding that ESO will probably be put on the back burner for a lot of people. And that's totally fine. I mean, take breaks, whatever. But I just wanted to explain that for myself, because for right now, it doesn't feel very fulfilling to me, even though it is a good chapter, it's a good class and stuff like that. And I'm sure some people out there, perhaps some of you watching, may be feeling this too, or maybe even observing it happen with your social circles. And I think it's fine. But yeah, that's really it. I don't know where I'm going to go with that one, but I will probably go in terms of like different content creation for different things, especially Starfield. Already kind of prepping for that. But that's basically my honest take on how Necrom is. If you were curious about how ESO is doing, how Necrom is, and second, my kind of perspective as a content creator and also as a longtime player. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt. And thanks for watching, and thanks for listening to my rambling. Let me know what you think down in the comments below about the reviewers' rating for Necrom, my ratings, and of course, my thoughts as to why ESO is going to have probably a tough time